Hi, good morning, and welcome to another reading of Boston Accent. I'm Mark Mattioli, and Boston Accent is available on Amazon.com. And let's pick up where we left off. And Boston Accent is of mature subject matter. All right, here we go. On the romance side of things, I had three spontaneous encounters with women I didn't know. Two of the encounters I was alone, and one I was with Seth. The Seth encounter took place on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe. Tahoe, for anyone that hasn't been there, is split almost 50-50 down the middle. Half the lake is in California, and half the lake is in Nevada. Seth and I and Macbeth climbed into the Seth's VW van early one bright sunny morning and decided to drive up around the Nevada side and then hike down to the water. It was a pretty good distance down to the water from the highway and very steep. The average distance, depending on where you parked, was a quarter mile. It wasn't a big deal going down, but coming up the steep grade was exhausting. Seth found a place on the side of the road to park, and there was only one other car nearby. In time, as we explored a great deal of the Nevada shoreline, we would learn that the most difficult hikes resulted in the more private coves. Your average person just wanted to get to the water, whereas Seth and I wanted our little piece of paradise to ourselves. The trail came to a very steep drop that sat high above the beach and gave you a view of the entire cove, which is breathtaking. The water was a brilliant bright blue, with areas almost aqua, where the bottom was sand. The strip of beach was modest, 3 or 4 sections separated by large boulders the size of small cars. The average distance from the woods to the water was only 30 feet, but the sand was deep and luxurious. The entire cove was less than 100 feet long. This was private and worth the tough climb out. Just as we started to make our way down to the beach, Seth pointed out that we weren't alone. Partially hidden behind one of the huge boulders was a young woman in her 20s, sunning nude. Seth suggested we go to the farthest corner of the beach and give her some privacy, but I had other ideas. Let's see how she reacts to us first, I tell him. Macbeth was the first on the beach, and after he took a dip in the lake, he ran up to the nude sunbather to say hello. Seth and I rounded the corner and apologized for intruding and offered to give her some space. She smiled and told us that was not necessary, and we were free to join her. Seth and I introduced ourselves as we lay out our beach towels next to her. Her name was Courtney, and she was from Carson City. It was clear to see that Courtney spent a lot of time in the sun minus a bathing suit. There were no tan lines anywhere on her very athletic body. Seth gave me a look once his towel was where he wanted it, shrugged, and then stripped naked. I had never been naked on a beach before, but there was the first time for everything. I was not going to be the only one with clothes on, so I shed my clothes as well. Courtney could easily see from our bright white tan lines that we did not frequent this beach. Seth and I then both dove into the lake, which may not be as cold as the Atlantic, but is still pretty damn cold. I'm sure Courtney was able to gauge how cold the water was as we returned to our towels. Once we were dry, I rolled a joint and invited Courtney to join us. She did as well as offer us some wine she had in her backpack. Once we finished smoking, Seth decided to go for a walk with Macbeth to the far end of the cove in search of some large rocks to dive off of. As I was talking to Courtney, she swung her legs around facing me and continued to talk to me with her legs wide open. Now, I understand this is a nude beach, but I also believe in body language, and I took this to be a bold statement she was making. I decided to go for broke, and I complimented her on the beautiful view she was sharing with me. She smiled, thanked me, and didn't show even a hint of embarrassment or annoyance. I decided to take it up a notch and asked her if she minded if I took a closer look. Courtney continued to smile as she lay flat on her back with her legs apart. I moved to her blanket and lowered my face as she laid her hand on the back of my head. Seth is sitting on top of a boulder, throwing a stick from Macbeth to retrieve in the water, when he looks over and sees Courtney sharing her blanket with me. He says out loud, "I'll be damned," and heads back in our direction. I'm still getting to know Courtney better when I hear Seth say, "Is 3 a crowd?" Courtney says, "3's a party," as Seth joins us on the blanket. My first nude beach was a memorable experience. We never saw Courtney again. The 2 solo romantic adventures I have occur simultaneously with 2 completely different women under completely different circumstances. One morning on my day off, I decided to walk over to the town beach, lay out a towel, and read a book. Joe had left town with his new band, Budfest, and would not be back for a couple of days, and Seth had left town to visit his mom. It was a beautiful, warm, sunny day, and when I arrived at the beach, I was pleased to see there were very few people there. That's one of the advantages to working the weekend and having weekdays off. As I kicked back, soaking in the sun, and trying to figure out where I had left off in my book, since my bookmark was missing, I noticed a pretty blonde down by the water. The reason she caught my eye was she wasn't dressed for the beach, and she was drinking a beer at 10 a.m. She was wearing a white halter top with blue jeans, had rolled up her pant legs, and was barefoot standing in the water, just deep enough to get her feet wet. She was staring out across the lake at nothing in particular, and as she turned so I could see her profile, she appeared to be talking to herself. The expression on her face was what I would call less than happy. I put my book down and continued to watch her. She seemed to sense my interest and looked in my direction. Her eyes wandered to the left and on the right of me, and then she looked right at me. I made no attempt to act like I wasn't staring at her, and instead nodded to her. She hesitated for a second, seemingly looking me up and down, and then nodded back. Then she tipped the beer to her mouth and drank till she emptied the can and looked for a trash barrel. She found a barrel near the entrance, which is close to where I was seated, and after tossing her empty, she approached me and said, "Hello." I said, "Hi yourself." Her eyes went to my pack of smokes on the towel, and she said, "Can I bum a smoke off you?" I said, "Sure. Would you care to sit down?" And I turned sideways on the towel so she could join me. I noticed several things about her as she sat down next to me, but the first thing I noticed was her feet were filthy, and she wasn't carrying a pair of shoes. We made our introductions, and her name was Sarah. Her dirty feet aside, the next thing I noticed was her eyes, which were blue and piercing. When she looked me right in the eye, and we were sitting very close, her eyes seemed to look right through to my soul. The other thing I noticed was she wasn't wearing a bra, and the sun made her white halter top transparent. I had to fight the urge not to look down at her breasts while talking to her, but it was a battle I was losing. I decided to divert my attention back to her feet, and I asked her if she lived nearby. She got visibly uncomfortable at this and said she was from Stockton. I asked her where her shoes were, and she got real upset as she told me how she'd come up to Tahoe with a boyfriend to hit the casinos, and they'd lost all their money. They ended up at the beach where they were going to sleep for the night, but they got into an argument over losing the money and whose fault it was. Sarah had taken her shoes off in the car and had walked down to the water to get away from her boyfriend, and he had started the car and driven off. He had not only abandoned her, but he had taken her shoes, and that was 8 hours ago. I asked her what she was going to do, and she said she had no clue. I told her I had a little cash, and I could probably help her out with getting her some shoes and a bus ticket home if she was interested. She looked at me real suspicious and said, "And what do you want in return?" I said, "Spend the day with me. We'll have a few beers and get something to eat. My roommate is away, and I have the house to myself." She stared at her dirty feet and considered my proposal for a moment before looking up at me and saying, "Okay." "Great," I told her. "First things first, Let's get you some shoes. Sarah and I walked the short distance to a tourist-themed store around the corner from my house. I had been there recently, and I knew they had sandals. Sarah picked out a pair in her size for $12, and I paid for them at the counter, while Sarah expressed her gratitude with a promise to pay me back. I told her not to worry about it. I figured if the day and night went the way I wanted it to, I would get my money back and then some. We left the store, and I suggested we get something to eat at the burger shack next door. Sarah said she was starving, having not eaten since lunch the day before. We both ordered burgers and fries to go, and while they were preparing our order, I ran to the store on the corner and bought a 12-pack of Corona, 2 limes, and a pint of tequila. By the time I got back to the burger shack, our order was ready, and Sarah was waiting for me with a big smile on her face. I smiled back as I looked her up and down and said, "Nice sandals." She continued to smile back and said, "Thanks. A really sweet guy bought them for me." I said, "Is that right? Well, I just bought you a pint of tequila. I hope I can measure up to the sweet guy." Sarah placed her hand on the small of my back, leaned in, and kissed me on the cheek and said, "You can do no wrong today, my friend. But I do need you to give me your address and phone number when we get to your house." I just nodded as we walked to the house. After we ate, I suggested that we sit out in the backyard and have a beer. When we got outside, Sarah remarked that she wished that she had other clothes to change into, as it was too hot for the jeans she was wearing. I asked her if she was wearing underwear, and she said yes. I told her, "Just take off your pants." But she wasn't comfortable with that, so I brought her up to my room to pick out a pair of shorts. I picked out a pair of my running shorts. They were on the small side, and they fit Sarah fine. She had taken her panties off because you could see them from the high cut of the shorts, and she thought it looked dumb. She wasn't comfortable walking around in her panties, but the loose fit of the crotch and the way she was sitting left nothing to the imagination. I didn't mention the views she was giving me, but instead remained the gracious host and continued to serve us both ice-cold beers and shots of tequila. At some point late in the afternoon, we were both in the kitchen, very buzzed and standing very close to each other when I pulled her close and began to kiss her. I suggested we move upstairs, and Sarah nodded in agreement. I didn't want to take her to my room, which is still just a mattress on the floor, so I led her by the hand into Joe's room. Joe had a waterbed, which I personally did not care for, but Sarah might think it was cool. My experience with waterbeds was when your partner changed positions in bed, it sent a wave in your direction that woke you up. I had this discussion with waterbed owners in the 70s when they were very popular, and I was told, "Not true. If that happened, it was a sign of there not being enough water in the bed." I was not planning on getting much sleep with Sarah tonight, so the firmness shouldn't be an issue. Joe would not be home till the following night, so this would work out well. As we sat on the edge of the bed and removed our shirts, I looked down at Sarah's feet, which were still filthy from the time she had spent barefoot. I didn't want to ruin the moment, but I didn't want her dirty feet in Joe's bed either, so I suggested we take a shower. Sarah looked at me like I was out of my mind and said, "Now? We can shower in the morning." I decided to risk embarrassing her and maybe pissing her off by being honest with her and saying, "Your feet are dirty. I'd like you to wash them before we get in bed. We can still shower in the morning." Sarah looked more embarrassed than pissed as I took her by the hand and led her to the bathroom, where I had her sit on the edge of the tub while I ran the water to clean her feet. I grabbed a face cloth from the linen closet and some liquid soap from the sink and began to wash her feet, as Sarah started shaking her head and laughing. "What's so funny?" I asked her. "You have a foot fetish. That's what this is all about," she said in a tone that suggested she had busted me. I shook my head and said, "No. I can see where you might think that, but I assure you, I find feet the least attractive part of a woman's body. I'm no toe sucker, and just the idea of it makes me ill. I believe in being clean when you crawl into bed, and that's it. I won't be touching your feet the rest of the night." Sarah stared at me, continued to smile, giving me a look, and said, "I'm not sure whether I believe you or not." Okay, we're out of time. And we'll pick this up again tomorrow. Same time, same bad channel. I'm Mark Mattioli. We're reading Boston Accent. It's available on Amazon.com. Ciao.